Now, the fight against corruption is gathering steam across the continent. We'll look at Uganda and Nigeria. We'll tell you how Swahili speakers in East Africa lost the Hakuna Matata tag, quote unquote, to Disney. And a pair of Kenyan entrepreneurs is finding a flourishing market for donuts on Instagram. Tonight in East Africa, where Uganda's President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni has announced a raft of measures, all of which are designed to ostensibly fight corruption in the East African coffee producer. One of them is setting up a toll-free line for the public to report cases of corruption directly to his office. Right now, Uganda ranks 100.
Fighting corruption. Campaigners here are calling for law enforcement. They say most of the country's service sectors are lagging behind because of bribery.
We need to deal with this vice of corruption because our sectors are ailing: the health sector, the agricultural sector, the education sector. And yet, we are this soft on corruption. We cannot continue like this unless we decide to be tough on corruption.
And Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni is promising tougher action. He wants the civil asset recovery legislation approved by lawmakers. If passed into law, it will
confiscate property of anyone who is involved in corruption. We are also going to strengthen the laws.
According to Uganda's Revenue Authority, the country loses over $53 billion every year in illegal financial flows. In 2017, the country's anti-corruption agency prosecuted 142 public officials and 99 were convicted of corruption. President Museveni is now urging locals to use the toll-free line to report cases of corruption. The president's new strategy may save millions of dollars stolen in scams every year, but it will take people's participation to work. But more needs to be done.
It is going to be very important.
It's hoped that this new round of commitment by local leaders could help boost sectors like health to save lives. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Let's stay with Hilary Ayesiga for more on this story. He joins us now live from the Ugandan capital of Kampala. So, Hilary, Uganda's ranked 151 out of 180 countries in TI's Corruption Perception Index. And according to the Auditor General, how much of the government's annual expenditure is either lost or wasted through corrupt deals?
Yes, Rama. Uganda loses over $53 billion every year in illegal financial flows. Most of this money is lost through procurement process. Public officials connive with contractors and divert government funds, and this results into shoulder work. So here you find government doing the same work time and again and spending a lot of money.
Right, so a new unit, the State House Anti-Corruption Unit, that has also been set up. But here's the thing I'm trying to understand. Why set up that unit when there already is an investigative arm of the government, the police, whose mandate includes investigating corruption cases? Yeah,
this shows that the government, this shows that the president does not trust police. He has lost trust in government agencies that fight corruption. While many cases are being convicted or investigated, a few of them appear or are convicted or come to the light in court. So in his recent remarks during the while commemorating the Anti-Corruption Day, the president castigated the police, saying this is the group which is taking bribes and hiding evidence. So perhaps that's why he decided to set up his own unit, which he supervises directly.
Indeed. So, looking at all the incidents we've seen of high-level graft coming out of Uganda, why is it that there's been no conviction, no prosecution of high-level officials in government who have been charged with corruption in the past?
Yes, Rama, the problem here is that when we see some of these high-level officials, some who would call the untouchables, when they are being investigated, they do not step aside to allow smooth investigation. This makes it hard for the prosecuting agency to gather evidence against them, and the end result is that they are acquitted in the courts of law. Now, this calls for the political will to handle such cases of corruption.
Indeed. One last question for you, Hilary. Is part of the problem the fact that you've got a lot of overlap? So, for example, you've got the Inspectorate of Government and then you have the Director of Public Prosecutions, and they're both looking into the same thing, and it seems they have overlapping mandates in fighting corruption.
Yes, there have been incidences where there have been agencies, especially these two agencies, have clashed when it comes to prosecution. When one of them is prosecuting a case or a suspect, the other one runs to court and stops the proceeding. This partly affects the efficiency of the fight against corruption.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Hilary Esiga there live in Kampala. Let's move on to Africa's largest economy now, Nigeria. PricewaterhouseCoopers is warning that the cost of corruption over there could rise by over a third of GDP, of about $2,000 per person by 2030. Authorities are finding creative ways to pass the anti-corruption message to the masses, in this case, through sports. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with more.
A race for a common purpose. These athletes are running not for the gold, but to raise awareness on corruption. Marathon is a very popular sport here, and the anti-graft body, the EFCC, is taking advantage of it to spread its anti-corruption message to the masses. The 2017 Corruption Perception Index by Transparency International ranked Nigeria the 27th most corrupt country in the world. It's a slight improvement from the previous year.
The fight against corruption has come to stay. Don't bring corruption back. Oh. I'm telling you, it has stayed. No going back. We are going to fight. And I want to call on you, all of you, everybody here, to join in the fight against corruption, because that is the only thing we can do to save this country.
Nigerians will vote their leaders early next year in a general election. The fight against corruption is expected to remain a topical issue in the campaigns. President Muhammadu Buhari, who campaigned on ending endemic corruption, is seeking re-election into office. Even though his success against corruption is highly contested by his critics, the anti-corruption message remains prominent in his manifesto. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Somalia has announced a series of steps to strengthen its commitment to dealing with corruption and to reinforce transparency in government operations. The country's Justice Minister Hassan Hussein Haji has signed a so-called Project Initiation Plan between his ministry and the UN Development Programme. It aims at strengthening government institutions to fight corruption and promote accountability to taxpayers.
The new plan is to enhance accountability in some of the country's key institutions. The institutions will include the Auditor General's Office.
We are heading to establish anti-corruption commission. They need a secretariat, they need training, they need help in all aspects. So I think this project initiation plan will lead us to develop all these institutions that will make easier for us to sign and ratify the United Nations Convention anti-corruption.
The UN says the program will also support civil society work. Speaking on behalf of the United Nations at the gathering, the UN Secretary-General's Deputy Special Representative for Somalia, Peter de Klerk, commended the federal government for its efforts to improve transparency, accountability and the fight against corruption in public offices.
We encourage all branches of government and federal member states to take measures to protect and expand integrity and accountability of the management of public finances and resources, as well as to advance the legal and institutional framework against corruption with robust enforcement and punitive measures.
The project initiation plan will be implemented over a 6-month period, after which the UNDP will roll out a full multi-year program to support the government of Somalia in its anti-corruption efforts.
Tunisia's parliament has approved the country's budget for 2019 without adding any new taxes. Now, the budget does focus on growth and development. The view is to create more jobs and investments in the North African economy. It also forecasts a fiscal deficit that will fall to 3.9% of GDP in 2019, down from an estimate of 5% for this year. The 2019 budget was drafted in accordance with suggestions from the International Monetary Fund. Tunisia's economy is expected to grow by at least 3.1% next year, up from this year's estimate of 2.6%. A few corporate headlines now. Let's start in the world of electric cars. Elon Musk, the current CEO of Tesla, may be thinking about bringing that product into the African market. He told a fan on Twitter that he would open a store in South Africa, quote, probably next year, end of quote. Now, that could be very good news for EV fans here in Africa. The continent, generally speaking, has been left out of the electric car revolution. The African fiber optics company Liquid Telecom has won a $180 million investment from the British development finance outfit CDC. The Mauritius-based privately owned firm said in a statement that the firm will allow it to accelerate the expansion of its Pan-African fiber optic network. Africa currently has the lowest rates of fixed and mobile broadband subscription penetration in the world at 0.6 per 100 inhabitants and 29.7 per 100 inhabitants respectively. A Chinese court has ordered Apple to stop selling some of its older iPhone models in China. The order comes after the Fuzhou court ruled that Apple had infringed on 2 patents owned by Qualcomm. Now, the ruling marks the latest development in a long-running international legal dispute over patents between these 2 tech firms. Apple says all of its iPhone models remain available in China, and it says it will pursue all legal appeals available in this case. And finally, an appeals court in Brazil has overturned a suspension ordered for proposed $4.75 billion tie-up between the U.S. aerospace giant Boeing and the civilian business of the Brazilian playmaker Embraer. Now, the ruling superseded a decision given by a lower federal court in Sao Paulo that prevented the outgoing government from taking any concrete action on this tie-up. The administration of the incoming president, Jair Bolsonaro, takes office on the 1st of January 2019. We're taking a short break on the program. Here's what's coming up next. The US and Senegal sign a 5-year power follow-up deal. And did hundreds of millions of Swahili speakers in East Africa really lose the tag Hakuna Matata to Disney? We'll explore that when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's resume the program in West Africa, where the US government's Millennium Challenge Corporation and the authorities in Senegal have signed a 5-year power corporation agreement worth at least $550 million. Senegal will contribute an additional $50 million to that deal, so that brings total financing to about $600 million. The Power Compact aims to benefit over 12 million people. It's designed to increase reliable access to electricity in the country's rural areas. The Millennium Challenge Corporation is an independent U.S. agency that works to reduce global poverty by investing in programs designed to boost GDP growth. Kenya Central Bank has released Kenya's new generation coins into circulation. Now, the new currency contains features that should make it easy to be used by visually impaired people as well. Available in denominations of 1 shilling, 5 shilling, 10 shillings and about 20 shillings as well. Now, unlike the prior generation coins that had portraits of former heads of state, Jomo Kenyatta, the country's first president, his successor Daniel Arap Moi, and the third president, Mwai Kibaki as well, the new legal tender has no such image. In fact, it only features Kenya's rich wildlife heritage. The central bank says the coins bear significant aspects of the country and they will serve as a means of passing on knowledge, conserving culture and promoting Kenya's global uniqueness. The move is also in line with Kenya's 2010 constitution.
Thanks to your hard work and commitment, our shilling has remained fairly stable and competitive, and equally encouraging, the banking industry as a whole has been vibrant, competitive, and without doubt, I believe, the most innovative on the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, today, in addition to accepting a dividend check from the central bank, we shall also be unveiling the set of new generation coins which are compliant with our 2010 Constitution of Kenya. Since taking office in 2013, my administration has midwifed the transition to a new constitutional order, which entails working with various institutions to implement the Constitution and to execute their mandates. I'm therefore extremely pleased that today we can achieve yet another milestone, launching the family of new generation coins.
Zimbabwe has also embarked on a project to renew infrastructure in most of its urban centers while constructing entirely new smart cities. These projects are expected to address issues like urban density problems, housing shortages, water and sanitation infrastructure that's barely been invested in, as well as smart energy solutions. With the details, here's CGTN's Terry Wangari.
The extensive urban renewal was kicked off by the new parliament building donated by the Chinese government and a new capital city around the new parliament. The new capital will occupy 18,000 acres and accommodate 1 million people at full capacity. The government is formulating the master plan and will service the land to add value to the city. The land will then be auctioned off to various investors.
This development is thus bound to create abundant trade and investment opportunities for both local and international investors. I therefore invite developers and investors to come on board and develop a world-class new city. Our private sector, I appeal to you. Here is an opportunity for long-term development, for long-term investment, for long-term return to your capital.
The program will see the rehabilitation and development of some of Zimbabwe's oldest residential suburbs to world-class status by 2030. The areas will have various environmental, commercial and residential renewal projects, including new construction and refurbishment of schools, health centers and residential infrastructure. The programs are expected to cost over $30 billion. Although they seem ambitious, funding for the projects will be through government and private partnerships, as well as direct foreign investment. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Now, cinema buffs will know that a live-action remake of the 1994 hit The Lion King is coming to a cinema screen near you sometime next year. But the movie's making news, at least in East Africa, for completely different reasons. Disney recently renewed a trademark it originally filed for over 20 years ago. The Swahili phrase Hakuna Matata. Now that roughly translates in English into no worries. But for the over 100 million Swahili speakers in Eastern, Central and Southern Africa, it has raised questions of cultural appropriation, and it has triggered quite a few angry headlines too. Earlier on, I spoke to Elizabeth Lenjo. She's a Kenyan lawyer specializing in intellectual property law. Here's her argument as to why that anger isn't justified.
They only registered in class 25 so that they can do t-shirts, they can do caps, they can do vests and shoes and whatever. So which means they are only getting the exclusivity insofar as class 25 is concerned.
Right.
And exclusivity means it will just only they in whatever jurisdictions they have registered will do t-shirts and hats and caps and all this clothing apparel with Hakuna Matata. But it does not mean that nobody else can use it. In the US already, aside from Disney having trademarked Hakuna Matata, there are other companies that have also registered a trademark under different classes. Like there's nail polish called Hakuna Matata, there's hair oil called Hakuna Matata, there's even I think some software or something, like so many other sort of products and services with the Hakuna Matata registration.
We've seen instances of specific goods, like for example, I can't make cheese out of sheep's milk, call it Roquefort, and then sell it to the international market, because that would be breach of, I believe it's French rules and EU law as well, right? That whole designation of rules of origin around specific goods. So you can only call a product champagne if it comes from Champagne in France, or specific kind of cheese can only be called by whatever brand name they have if they come from particular parts of Europe. Why doesn't that apply here?
So this is another intellectual property asset we call geographical indications. Now, unfortunately, in Kenya, we've not ratified the International Treaty on GIs, so it doesn't exist here.
Given the fact that the EU has been negotiating economic partnership agreements with various regional economic blocs, the EAC, the Southern African Development Community, isn't the recognition of those geographical indicators part of the EPAs?
It should be, yeah. And you see, the thing for GIs, it's to also promote products made from a particular community or territory.
Right.
And then you're able to assert and identify certain characteristics that make your cheese Roquefort. Why do you call it Roquefort? It has a sweet, sour taste. There's a way you can actually describe how it tastes.
Right. So in this instance, because I hear your argument around this does not stop you from using Hakuna Matata as another company other than Disney. But by the same token, trade and commerce these days happens across borders, right? So for argument's sake, if I set up a t-shirt company today with branded Hakuna Matata t-shirts right here in Nairobi, and I believe you've seen them at the airports as we come in and out of the country, if I put those on eBay or Amazon and I sell them in the US, am I in breach of Disney's trademark rights in that territory?
Yes. Because now you'll be crossing over into the territory in which they're protected, because intellectual property is generally territorial. So as an applicant, I then do what is called designation. I decide which territories of business I want to register my brand, where it makes commercial sense.
Right.
And of course for Disney, the reason we have here Hakuna Matata t-shirts and Disney has never said anything is because they did not bother to register here. We are not their market. They know for us Hakuna Matata is just a normal phrase. I mean, who is interested in buying a t-shirt written Hakuna Matata, really? Probably not me and you.
Not in this market.
Yeah, exactly. But in the US, it's different. Swahili is viewed as an exotic language. It sounds interesting and whatnot. Together with the wild animals, what we are famous for. Voila, it's an easy marketing gimmick. You'll have, buyers.
And what's the legal precedent on how the monetization of cultural assets is handled, especially in the context of traditional ideas, traditional languages, traditional medicines, that sort of thing?
So now there's this new emerging area of intellectual property, a new asset that is currently under discussion at WIPO. Traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions, as well as genetic resources. So that is a conversation now that's happening to figure out how we would then protect some of our local cultural properties. But the challenge that the system is currently facing and the conversations are currently facing is who owns what.
Right,
because when you
the
look,
best example would be the Maasai Shuka.
Exactly, the Maasai Shuka origins from Scotland. Yeah. So what exactly then do the Maasai own? Is it the colors, the combination of blue and red? Is it the wool? Of course not. You know. So it's about that conversation. Then figure out what a repository would look like first. Then after that we can have a conversation about protection. But unfortunately we are doing things in reverse.
On to North Africa now, where Tunisia has unveiled its first locally assembled car, the Wallis, as it's called. To show it off, the country's premier used it at a plenary session in Parliament discussing the 2019 budget. Wallis was founded in 2006 by a group of friends and entrepreneurs. It's since then created hundreds of jobs and revived the local economy in the industrial city of Tunis. Here's Anin Chachi with the details.
This procession of armoured vehicles is heading to Parliament in downtown Tunis. The smallest car is one of the fastest and most attractive vehicles in the North African state. It is the Premier's new 4x4 ride, a Wallis car. For a decade, this company has been manufacturing the first Tunisian car. It has recently gained in popularity in Europe, the Mediterranean basin and the Gulf region. The project was the dream of two brothers who started a whole production chain with just 2 holiday cars. They borrowed around $70,000. Omar, the CEO, says financing the business was a challenge.
At the beginning, yes, it's for most of the people it was crazy. It was a crazy idea, and even more for the bankers. We didn't find one banker helping us in the project. We looked for love money, like friends and family money, and we promised to everyone if the project wasn't going to succeed, they were going to have a prototype of the car.
That was 10 years ago, and some relatives and friends believed in their idea.
We had 2 prototypes, and we had around 15 people giving us their money, so it was hard to divide the 2 prototypes into 50 people, but you know, when you're an entrepreneur, this is our role, is to find ways to convince people to believe in your vision, to believe in your project.
Wallis car headquarters are located in a popular neighborhood in the suburbs of Tunis. The manufacturer has created many direct jobs and revived the local economy. Hossein was born and raised in this area. The car manufacturer employs around 60 graduates. Wallis car has also created 200 indirect jobs.
I was trained by Wallis car. I have learned new skills in this promising automotive sector. I feel at home when I come to the company. Working here has changed my life.
This year, Wallis car has produced 300 units. 50% were exported to France, Italy and Spain, while 150 vehicles were sold to Tunisian consumers. The car manufacturer plans to increase the production capacity. New models will be launched in the next 3 years.
Now we are raising funds in this year, and our goal is to be in 2020-21 to go up to 2,000, 3,000 cars. We will have also a pickup to launch. We're going to have an electric model to be launched and a city car.
The Giga brothers, founders of Wallis car, have developed a successful business model, though they were never predestined to become entrepreneurs in the automotive sector. The initiative has encouraged many Tunisian youths to start their own enterprises. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Time for another break of the program. There's plenty more coming up. We'll explore why the UK is gearing up for no-deal Brexit after the postponement of Tuesday's vote. And climate change cannot be wished away. We'll explore why next.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's recap the headlines making your top stories at this hour. All headlines will be on the United Nations General Assembly after the adoption of the Global Compact for Migration in Morocco. More than 160 countries have shown support for policy that essentially seeks to ensure regular and legal migration, with a lot more emphasis on the protection of human rights. The US and quite a few European nations have stayed away from the pact, though they claim it compromises their sovereignty. The US State Department has declared the former Gambian President Yahya Jammeh ineligible for entry into the country. The measure is largely related to charges of corruption and gross human rights abuses during his 22 years in power. The directive also includes members of Jammeh's immediate family. Now, that decision comes 2 years after he went into exile in Equatorial Guinea. And again, China is helping Zimbabwe cross over from its colonial heritage to a path of transformation by supporting the country in the construction of a new parliament building. The project will be taken care of by the Shanghai Construction Group at a cost of nearly $100 million. And Somalia has announced a series of steps to strengthen its commitment to deal with corruption and to reinforce transparency. The country's Justice Minister Hassan Hussein Haji has signed a so-called Project Initiation Plan between his ministry and the UN Development Programme that aims to strengthen government institutions to fight corruption and promote accountability to taxpayers. That's a run through your headlines. All right then, let's focus on Brexit. Will the UK leave the EU without a Brexit deal after all? Is a no-deal Brexit increasingly becoming the odds-on scenario? That very well may happen as the EU is ruling out renegotiating the terms of the British divorce treaty or its Irish border protocol. The decision came as the British Prime Minister Theresa May sought last-ditch assurances from the bloc to save the deal she spent the last year or so negotiating after pulling a vote that she acknowledged she would lose.
The deal we have achieved is the best deal possible. It's the only deal possible. And so we cannot... There is no room whatsoever for renegotiation. But, of course, there is room, if used intelligently, is room enough to give further clarification and further interpretations without opening the withdrawal agreement. This will not happen. Everyone has to know that the withdrawal agreement will not be reopened.
Right, and so what exactly is this backstop all about? Well, the current deal states that the UK needs to finish all the trade negotiations within the transition period after Brexit. Now, Ireland and Britain's Northern Ireland will not have a hard border between them, no matter what. Now, that essentially means that if the UK failed to strike a deal with the EU, Northern Ireland would still be part of the EU in terms of trade, and that essentially would keep the UK under, all of the UK, under EU customs rules. Now, that in turn would supposedly last until it is superseded by a more permanent trade arrangement. Critics, however, say that that essentially bundles the UK with the EU indefinitely. It would create a chain of negative effects on the UK economy, they argue. In a bid to save her deal, May has sought support from the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Tuesday in The Hague. Rutte called the dialogue useful. She then met with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel in Berlin. Now, the UK doesn't know exactly on what terms it will leave, at least not at the moment. Here's Xie Chang taking a look at how Brexit will work out with no deal.
You initiate your own proposal. It's relatively difficult for us in our not very well-developed intellectual thinking to understand that.
That was an interview on British broadcaster Sky News on Monday, showing the frustration around the mostly agreed but not sealed Brexit deal. British Prime Minister Theresa May launched a fight to save her Brexit deal over breakfast with her Dutch counterpart on Tuesday. It was the first in a lineup of meetings with European leaders in the coming days. The main sticking point is a backstop provision that aims to guarantee an open border between EU member Ireland and the UK's Northern Ireland after Brexit.
The fundamental problem with the backstop is it's unacceptable to Parliament for the same reason that it's acceptable to the EU and the Irish government. That is, that it's not unilaterally terminable. You cannot change the withdrawal agreement. That's legally binding. You can add some conciliatory language to the political declaration, but the fundamental fact remains that the backstop is for life unless the EU agrees to end it.
And here's a knock-on effect after the divorce.
If you leave the single market, as the Prime Minister intends, not only do you have that border in the Irish Sea, which is so toxic for unionists, you also have a regulatory border now in the Channel, which you don't have at the moment. And that means that goods will be checked at Calais, which aren't checked at the moment. And that has real knock-on effects for the rest of the economy in England, with supermarkets and hospitals standing so affected. People aren't talking about this.
May said he would talk to EU leaders ahead of a summit in Brussels on Thursday and Friday, seeking quote-unquote further reassurances over the Irish border backstop. EU leaders hinted that they are prepared to help Britain up to a point, but insisted that the Brexit agreement could not be changed. So the risk of a Brexit without a deal is still lurking. Xia Cheng, CGTN.
The French President Emmanuel Macron is trying to end the worst political crisis in his country in about 50 years. In a nationally broadcast speech, he pleaded for calm and promised to ease the tax burden on low-income workers and retirees. Now, that speech comes after weeks of the Yellow Vest protests that have left, so far, 4 people dead and hundreds more injured. CGTN's Elena Casas filed this report.
A new tone from French President Emmanuel Macron. Sounding humbled and apologetic, he told France he knows he's made mistakes.
Doubtless, we haven't answered your worries quickly enough over the last 18 months. I take responsibility for this and for creating the impression that it wasn't my concern, that I had other priorities. I also know I've hurt some of you with my remarks.
Recognising his government's been seen as dictating from Paris, he promised to visit mayors across France. He announced the minimum wage will be going up €100 a month starting in January. Taxes on overtime hours will be scrapped and low-income pensioners will get a tax break. But he defended his controversial decision to end a tax on wealth, insisting the cut creates jobs.
We will respond to the economic and social urgency with strong measures, by cutting taxes more rapidly, by keeping our spending under control.
The president is looking for ways to end weeks of demonstrations that have already hit the country's economy.
Businesses are counting the costs of another weekend of violent protests. The Bank of France revised its growth forecast down on Monday, putting further pressure on the president.
On what should have been the busiest shopping weekends of the year in the run-up to Christmas, the French Retail Association says shops saw a 17% drop in foot traffic. Shopkeepers are running out of patience.
It's intolerable. It's unacceptable to have this degree of violence at protests. And what's really a shame is that some people are taking advantage of the protests to loot shops because the police are busy elsewhere and can't intervene.
The protesters say this government and previous leaders have ignored the everyday concerns of low-income people for decades.
People are expressing that they don't feel represented at all. They're showing a lot of defiance towards political parties in general, and this isn't a new feeling.
The question now is whether this will be enough to make them feel listened to, or whether a crack has opened in French society that President Macron will be hard pushed to repair. Elena Casas, CGTN, Paris.
As leaders from more than 200 countries and organizations gather in Poland for COP24, experts are warning once again about the global impact of climate change. According to a report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, global warming has reached new heights and developing countries are quite literally feeling the heat. CGTN's Silkina Alwalia found this report from Jakarta.
A research by Stanford University states that the cost of global warming to the world's economy is now detrimental. The aim is to cut emissions and to stop planet Earth from getting hotter. The research shows that if action is taken today and temperatures only rise around 2 degrees Celsius, global GDP would fall around 15% in the coming years. But if nothing is done and temperatures rise as high as 4 degrees Celsius, global GDP would drop nearly 30%. And that, experts say, is something to worry about. The result would be permanent and almost irreversible.
Untuk kalangan private sector, tidak bisa.
Businesses in this day and age need to understand the long-term effects of climate change. They have to start thinking about new management techniques, technological innovation, and how to build an entirely new economic scheme that will benefit them in the future.
The industries that are most at risk include agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. It's estimated that climate change could jeopardize the jobs of more than 1.2 billion people globally.
Global warming already affecting some part of the developing country, especially. The rainforest is declining, also affecting how the food security in some part of the countries. Because right now, in the term of the last 4 years, for example, Indonesia, food price is already increased dramatically. And it's also affecting how the productivity of the food crops in the next future for our next generation.
In October, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report saying greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have reached groundbreaking levels. To keep temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius, the panel, along with Greenpeace, advised people to eat less meat, dairy, and eggs, because the production of these food items create more than 50% of global greenhouse emissions. Silkina Alwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
Business leaders from the United States have been weighing in, explaining how their companies are pursuing actions to tackle climate change, despite the US president's policy of backtracking and criticizing and saying outright he doesn't believe in global warming. Representatives from companies like Microsoft, JP Morgan Chase and Berkshire Hathaway Energy are among those that took part.
We haven't given up. We continue to talk with the administration. We talk about the ways that, greater efficiencies can benefit our economy and also the climate change issue as well. So we're still moving forward, and we haven't slowed down our pace, one bit at all.
This administration is not really listening to voices like that, although we keep talking. But state houses are listening, so state-level governments, and we're active in dialogue in states and also on Capitol Hill, so our legislature. And it's not so much lobbying as it is education. Like, why do we think it's such a really good idea to open up clean energy markets, energy efficiency markets, make the best use of what fossil fuel resources we're using, why high emission standards are really valuable for business, etc.
Let's go back to Jakarta, where the city is facing a rather serious problem. Researchers say Jakarta is sinking faster than expected. It could be fully submerged by 2050 if it continues at this rate of progress. Climate change, of course, is making matters a lot worse, but geography does play a part, as does illegal corporate practices. CGTN's Silkina Alwalia explains.
One of Asia's biggest cities is dealing with a sinking problem. Research has found that Jakarta, home to more than 10 million people, is one of the fastest sinking cities in the world. The prediction by experts from Bandung Institute of Technology states that 95% of North Jakarta could be underwater in the next 35 years. It's a grim prediction for Ardianto, who's been living in Muara Baru, an area in North Jakarta for more than 2 decades.
My mother told me that when I was younger, if we were to compare the water levels on land, you could still tell that the land was higher. But I think because of rapid urbanization, the building of skyscrapers in this area, the land here keeps sinking up to here. They have rebuilt and fixed this wall at least 3 times now. It keeps falling apart. This alleyway used to be much wider.
Artie's family has been living in this house for nearly 50 years. Their livelihoods are based here. But experts say communities that live in areas they call blue spaces are highly at risk of forcefully fleeing their homes.
You have 13 rivers in Jakarta. The capacity to accommodate the so-called surface runoff or the amount of water that flowing on the surface is decreasing because of, you get, for example, there was a river in South Jakarta which formerly or normally is 16 meters. Now you have only 1 or 2 meters, for example, and this is not unique or only on a particular location.
Climate change is responsible for the increasing flood levels in coastal megacities like Jakarta, and it is causing the sea to rise even faster than expected. It's estimated that Jakarta is sinking by an average of 15 centimeters per year, with almost half of the city already sitting below sea level. This particular area where I am right now is the center of Jakarta. This is the icon of the city. You can see I'm surrounded by shopping malls, 5-star hotels, and office buildings. But scientists say at least 5,000 years ago, this area was a blue space, which means that it was entirely covered with water. Even today, research has found that many of the buildings here have their own groundwater pump and are extracting water without permission or license. The Indonesian government is now investigating those landowners that are making things worse. Meanwhile, experts suggest to strengthen mangrove restoration projects in some parts of Jakarta to preserve and foster the city's ecosystem. Sulkina Aluwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
As we speak, China is the world's largest single market for smartphones, but consumers, it seems, are dialing down on their demand for these devices. CGTN's Francis Kuo explains what exactly is causing this downturn.
This is Wilson Wong's office, a cramped shop in Hong Kong. One of his accomplishments of the day, replacing the screen of a damaged smartphone in fewer than 10 minutes. Wong has been repairing phones for more than 30 years and managed to keep up with all the advances.
Once smartphones were released, I started using messaging apps to communicate with customers. I had to teach them step by step, as when some customers switched from non-smartphones to smartphones, they didn't know how to use the phones, and I had to know all about it.
But it's not clear how an emerging trend will affect his business. Shipments of new mobile phones this year have dropped 15% from the same time last year, according to China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. Users say it's an issue of practicality.
I only change my phone when it's totally broken. That takes 2 or 3 years. These days, smartphones are better quality, and they don't break so easily.
I bought my phone 2 years ago, and it still works well. Even if I decided to buy a new one, I'd add a longer after-sales service to extend its useful life and save the cost of upgrading to a new phone.
So, experts say smartphone companies need to step up their game amid a saturated market.
So far, there's not a lot of new innovation to attract customers. When the companies do offer new phones, most of the upgrades are in the hardware, like faster processors. But there's not that many upgrades in the software, so users cannot really see much of the difference.
And the costs of smartphones are rising, with the price of raw materials going up. One example, the price of iPhone's newest X model cracked $1,000. What's more, the U.S.-China trade war could push prices even higher. U.S. President Donald Trump had pushed for a 10% tariff on smartphones from China, which make up nearly 3/4 of all smartphones imported into the U.S. Back in the shop, Wong is used to riding the tide when it comes to technology, and he'll keep tinkering in hopes the customers keep coming. Francis Kuo, CGTN.
All right, then a quick update on commodity prices for you. Keeping a very close eye on Brent crude, especially considering the fact that last week OPEC and OPEC Plus basically said, you know what, we're going to take 1.2 million barrels of crude right off the market. And Saudi Arabia made a few commitments on top of that as well. But it's not really being reflected in the oil price for Brent. If you expected a pop, it's not really coming through, at least not to the level that some might have expected. In fact, at these levels, it's about 4% in the red so far this year. Will that change come 2018? We'll find out. In the meantime, here's what's coming up next. A pair of Kenyan entrepreneurs.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Thousands of visitors have shared their passion for chocolates in Tunisia's first festival dedicated to this commodity. The event was held at the prestigious exhibition centre in downtown Tunis. CGTN's Alan Shachi was there.
Several renowned chefs took part in the chocolate and pastry festival in Tunisia. Chocolate lovers tasted their favorite chocolate pairings. Whether it's milk, dark or white chocolate, the festival features mouth-watering creations.
In a festive atmosphere, the exhibitors, chocolate makers, bakers and confectioners will share with the public their passion, some trade secrets, their novelties, and will present the most recent trends in matters of chocolate and the pastry art.
This fair, the first of its kind in Tunisia, showcases a large selection of chocolates, sweets and pastries to businesses and members of the public.
A competition of sculpture on chocolate was organized by the World Pastry Cup Club. Tunisian chefs unveiled their creations for chocoholics, or chocolate lovers.
The main difficulty is tempering the chocolate by passing it through 3 different temperatures to create a chemical reaction. The Chocolate Sculpture Challenge is an occasion to discover new talents and to share our passion with chocoholics.
At least 200 children have attended the festival. Master chocolatier and food artisans presented a variety of fine chocolates and chocolate-inspired products that tease the taste buds of boys and girls.
School visits open the kids' eyes onto this amazing world. They can learn how to make their favorite chocolate and sweets at home. The chocolate workshop aims to initiate children to the art of chocolate making.
Over 20,000 chocolate lovers flock to the 2-day national event. The Chocolate and Pastry Festival is an occasion for Tunisian professionals to test new products and deepen relations with chocoholics. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
One more story for you to whet your appetite. If you're in the mood for freshly baked donuts, you might pop into your local bakery. Well, here's a pair of Kenyan entrepreneurs whose customers are hopping to their Instagram page to make their orders. Astatal has more on Kenya's growing Instagram market.
In a small production space in Kikuyu, Kenya, Michael Mumbi prepares to make a batch of donuts. Michael and his partner, Wilson Muhia, don't need much space. Their customers won't be found in a bakery, but online.
My partner and I, Michael, we usually just invited each other, come over, try a recipe, we cooked, so it's more or less like, can't say showing off how well you can cook, but yes, this time round we did donuts and we both liked them and we shared them with also some other neighbors, and they advised, well, how about you try and sell them? And that same evening we just set up Grub Donuts on Instagram, and the rest is history.
They now offer 11 different flavors. Instagram helps the pair not only show off their unique donuts, but also attract customers. Orders are placed on their website, with 98% of the traffic coming from Instagram. Grub Donuts is not the only Kenyan business cashing in on social media platforms.
If you look at the Kenyan context, there are a lot of barriers to you just selling your stuff online. So a very classic problem is collecting payments. Another one is doing deliveries. So it wasn't so obvious that people would jump into the e-commerce space directly. So I think what really happened is people found these social media channels as good ways to market and get people to know a bit more about what they are selling.
Online shopping in Kenya has grown 14% over the past 3 years. Social media platforms like Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram make up around 15% of online sales. But a lack of trust is preventing the market from reaching its full potential. By interacting with our customers purely online, reviews carry a lot of weight for Grub Donuts.
Instagram and the fact that we're online and we do not have a physical shop really matters in terms of customer reviews. So we're basically running this business on reputation, on a good reputation. So if we get a really bad review, that basically means our business comes to an end. So we need to keep up